Many patients, when they come in, either I have patients that have researched this, have nonstop looked at their birth plan, will come in from their day one, they did their confirmation appointment and talk to me about delayed cord clamping or very specific niche things like perineal massage, and they literally just found out they're pregnant. I have many other patients that come to me later in pregnancy that have no idea what a birth plan is, and they just say, "Doc, I just want a healthy baby and I want to be healthy and get through this and move on." When I'm structuring this video, it's the point of your birth plan or birth preferences is to figure out ideally how we can best support you through the birth process and help you make decisions. And the reason why that's important is if you do not make those decisions, someone else will make it for you. And I mean that sincerely because you don't have options that you don't know about. So I'm going to take the perspective that I'm talking to someone that has no idea what they want, that has no knowledge about birth. And even if you find it a little too simplistic or not up to the level of where you at, stick with me because towards the end of the video, you're going to see why that's really, really important. So when I have a patient come to the office, I sometimes I usually mention these things either in a preconception counseling visit or briefly in the beginning of pregnancy, but generally when we are having a birth plan conversation, usually people hit like their nesting phase in the third trimester. And when I'm having this conversation and a patient says, "Doc, I have no idea what I want," I usually respond by saying, "You usually know more than you think you do." And I ask, "Do you want a vaginal delivery or a C-section?" And most of the time I get, "Doc, I don't want a C-section. I want to do whatever we can for a vaginal delivery." Or I might get, "There's no way I'm having a baby vaginally. My mom had a C-section. My grandmother had a C-section." I have a lot of, in Miami specifically, it's very multicultural. We have patients from, for example, Latin America, Brazil, Turkey, etc. And there's some of these cultures are very averse to having a vaginal delivery. So it's important for me to know where you are because the way these birth preferences work and the idea of this whole conversation is we work as a team. You tell me what you want, or I help you figure out what you want. We look at your medical background and where you are, and we try to find something that would be ideal for you. And again, when we're talking about preferences, things happen, but still, this plan A is really important to try to guide you there. Like we aim for the stars. Obviously, we pivot when we need to. We're looking for a way to meet you where you are and then make sure it's medically safe. So when you go into a delivery situation, you're comfortable in what's happening with us as a provider and we're all on the same page. So, and even if things have to change, we kind of want to do our best to meet you as close to that experience as possible. So let's start there. So we're talking about a C-section because we're going to start there. To be very clear, there's two reasons to have a C-section. It could either be elective or it could be medical. And this is important to know. It's a really important differentiation. We really do our best to decrease the amount of elective C-sections in America. I'll make another video on why it's important to lower the amount of C-sections because of a bunch of medical risks down the line. But again, at least in my practice, if I counsel you appropriately and you as a person, you have autonomy, meaning you have the rights to make decisions over your own body, and you tell me, "Doc, I want a C-section," I personally of the mind that I will do that C-section because you have the right to choose what happens to your body. And the same way, I personally would not push someone to have a C-section when it's not medically needed. I would not push someone the other way around either, but fine. That is the elective side. Where this gets a little fuzzy is the medical side. So there are some medical conditions, they're rare, but there's some cardiac and neurological conditions that would make having a vaginal delivery a bad idea. More commonly, there's some surgical reasons, right? So let's say you had a C-section prior, right? That is a different conversation on if you're going to have a trial of labor after a C-section, or TOLAC, or you may have heard VBAC, vaginal delivery after a C-section, versus just a repeat C-section. The other question is, what type of C-section did you have? Because some types of C-sections are not safe to have a vaginal delivery after. You may have had surgery on your uterus, like a myomectomy. It's the surgery where you have fibroids and you take them out. Depending on where the fibroids are, it may not be safe. So as you can see, for example, imagine you're coming to my office, you're excited and you found out you were pregnant and you find out, "Doc, I'm so excited, I'm pregnant, I really want to have a vaginal delivery." And then you tell me, "Hey, 2 years ago, I had 19 fibroids removed." And that would be a time to have a conversation on risk expectations, if that kind of makes sense. So that's the C-section side. On the vaginal delivery side, I personally view having a vaginal delivery, I look at it as a continuum. So let's start with the hypnobirth side of this. What is the hypnobirth or physiological birth? Those are for people that really want like minimal interventions. They don't want people doing things to you. You come from the affect of, "Hey, my mom did this, my grandmother did this," and they want the experience of having a vaginal delivery naturally with minimal interventions. And nowadays, I find this to be less common, but because we really do support this in our practice, I think we see it more than most other people in Miami because we push people a lot to work with doulas and we work with a lot of people in our own practice delivering in the hospital. But what I found is many of the patients that want this, they want that experience. And it's important to kind of have an idea of if you want a physiological birth, to know where your limits are. And what I mean by that is this: when you have a hypnobirth or you want a physiological birth and you want minimal interventions, you then have to ask from a risk benefit profile what's important to you. Because you have to then know where are you going to deliver, right? So if you want minimal interventions, you have a continuum of home to hospital, and there's some birth centers or some intermediaries depending on where you live and how much interventions you want. But if you are someone that wants a physiological birth, I strongly recommend you get the support around you for that. The way I explain this to people is, as humans, we're persistence hunters. We're made to run multi-marathons. I can't do that. I cannot run a marathon. But can people train to run a marathon? Yes. At least I think a lot of people can. But it would really help if they practice and got a coach. So when I get someone that tells me, hey, I would like a physiological birth, I would like to minimize interventions, I strongly recommend to get the appropriate support team, which includes getting a doula, having a supportive practice that will support that. And then from there, there's risk to having babies at home versus having babies at a hospital. You don't have access to an operating room, anesthesia, etc. at home, but you do get the comfort at home. I personally do not do home births. In the future, I'm going to make a video because we work with many doulas, on their perspective on it, so you can get a more unbiased opinion. But there's spectrums on what people offer, and there's trade-offs wherever you go. And if you were to try to have a home birth, I would strongly recommend finding the team beforehand that'll fit you best. In Florida, I talk to the doulas around here, and they tell me it's the Wild West of having a baby. There's some people that are incredible midwives, and there's some that are a little less safe. So investing in the team before you're pregnant is very, very important in that case. And in the hospital, there are things we can do to support physiological birth, but each practice has their own guidelines. For example, our practice, we do promote physiological birth a lot, but we have certain limitations. For example, we prefer people not go past 41 weeks. We need people at least intermittently monitored. We usually have people get a hep block, which is an IV that's not connected to anything. We encourage postpartum Pitocin. Those are things that we push for in our practice. There's some practices that don't allow doulas in their hospital. Who is a scheduled induction for? For example, I induced both my kids. Why did I do that? First of all, it's just my wife likes more control. The second reason is we had my daughter when I was still in residency, and I got 1 week of paternity leave. We wanted another week. So for us, the timing and the control is most important. And there was a big trial, which we'll go over in another video, called the ARRIVE trial, that basically showed that C-section rate was the same. But the experience is a lot more medical, and average time is 18 hours, and it can be longer. So the experience is quite different. I find most people tell me they want something in the middle, which is they don't want it to be induced. Most patients, at least in our demographic area, end up wanting to get an epidural. And if they need some Pitocin or something along the way, that they opt for it. But my point is it's really helpful to know what you want. And I'm going to go through why. I'm going to tell you a story about one of my friends who called me recently. She was 33 weeks. She's having twins, and she had a vaginal delivery in the past. Her twins were vertex breech, which means the first baby's head is down and the second baby was head up. Her doctor delivers those babies. Her practice is only one doctor, but every other weekend, another person covers for that doctor. The doctor that covers does not do those deliveries vaginally. So this friend of mine is now in a situation where she's hoping that the person, when she goes into labor, is on call, because she will end up being in a situation, if the other person's on call, where she may get a C-section, which would be medically unnecessary, or decline the C-section and then put her life in the hands of someone that does not feel comfortable doing that, which is not a great situation. So going back to kind of what we talked about here is, when you get pregnant, you kind of want an idea of what is my own constitution, what's important to me, right? If you're someone that wants a C-section, for example, there are some practices that no matter what you tell them, they will refuse to do a primary C-section because they have the choice to do that, but that may put you in a very odd situation. So let's go back to everything we talked about here. The point I'm trying to get across is in the beginning of the pregnancy, you're trying to find which practice is the right fit for you. And that fit is really important because later in the pregnancy, it's very hard to transfer a lot of the times. And if you did, you don't have the time to build trust and connection with the people taking care of you. So when we're talking about a vaginal delivery versus a C-section, right? You may be someone that is dead set on a C-section, and providers that you chose will not do a primary C-section without a medical indication. You may be someone that really wants a doula and have a baby in the hospital, but the hospital does not allow doulas into the hospital. Your provider may not support that. So figuring that out is unbelievably helpful because even though no one can do something to your body that you will not allow, having your values aligned with your provider will lead to a lot better of an experience. And doing this beforehand will greatly help you in the future when you're actually having your baby. Because this, hopefully, I'm hoping this is a beautiful, nice experience for you guys, for you and your family. And having this set up, I think, is one of the most underrated things in the whole birth plan discussion. So, what are the 5 questions that I recommend you ask your provider when you're trying to decide if they're the right practice for you? The first I would ask is, how do you approach birth preferences? And what I mean by that is simply what we kind of talked about already is you may have a doctor that says, I only induce people on Tuesday and Friday, and that is how my practice runs. You may want to know that beforehand. You may want to know, for example, if you wanted to do more of a physiological birth and have that support with you, do they support doulas? Are they okay with delayed cord clamping? These are like small micro things, but the big picture stuff, it would be really nice to know, like in a preconception, which is an appointment you can make with them before you're pregnant to see if a practice is the right fit for you, or during the first appointment. The second question, and this is more pertaining to if you want a vaginal delivery, is what is an NTSV rate, which stands for N is nulliparous, which is the first time mom. T is term, like, hey, are you a full-term baby? S is for singleton, which means one baby's in there. And V is vertex, is head is down. What is that rate that ends up getting a C-section? And that's important to know because, for example, let's say you are someone very interested in a vaginal delivery. If they tell you it's a 50% C-section rate for a first-time mom, you're fighting an uphill battle. And sometimes, by the way, for example, I think our C-section rate is slightly higher than we'd like it to, but a lot of times if it is, ask why. In our case, we just have a lot of people that prefer a C-section, and if they push us to, we'll do it because we believe in autonomy. But you want to make sure that the idea that you have going into is supported. The third question I usually ask is, how many providers are in your practice and who will be delivering me? And you'll get different answers, but there's advantages and disadvantages to each one of those. The advantage of having a single provider is that you only know one provider. You get to know that person. You build a relationship with that person. The downside is they're human beings with a family and a life. So the downside to a one provider is, what if they can't make it or show up? You are then kind of set with whatever backup system they have, and you may be okay with that, but you will want to ask what it is beforehand so you have that coverage. On the other extreme, you have practices of many, many people, or like a hospitalist type of system. And that leaves you probably not meeting the person that's going to deliver you. But on the other hand, they tend to be very well rested, which when you're someone's taking care of you is a good thing. Our practice, we have 4 doctors. It's somewhere in the middle because we want to meet everyone who we're delivering. But at the same time, when I'm on call, and the next day I'm not. So I'm never making a decision of my patient versus my family, because if you do this long enough, at some point in time, people forget, I think, doctors are human, and we have to kind of fight back against that, because as humans, we have urges of how can we best help our family versus our patients. And what I personally like about our practice, because we have a few people in our practice, is those interests are never against each other. When I'm on call, I'm on call. When I'm off call, I'm off call. But there's different variations of that. But just knowing that ahead of time, I think, is very helpful. So question number 4 is, do you have experience with your specific situation and what the NICU level is? And the NICU is the neonatal ICU. And those are the doctors that take care of newborn babies that need help. Unfortunately, things don't always go according to plan. Sometimes babies are born early or may get an infection. And there are things that usually people don't want to think of right when they find out they're pregnant. But knowing that information helps, for example, of if you know you have a medical issue like diabetes and there's a chance that your baby may need more help, you want to make sure that they have the capacity to take care of the baby. Do they have the capacity to take care of you? For example, I'm going to give some extreme situations. Some patients find out they have cancer and they're pregnant. Do they have the ability to co-manage? These are things that don't necessarily hit people right away. I know it's a little on the fringe there, but definitely everyone should know their NICU level, because it's nice to know that you have the support. And if they do not have the support, what is the plan if you have the baby early, for example, and the current NICU does not have the capacity to take care of that baby? That ties into the fifth question is, where do you deliver? I get patients sometimes that are shocked that we don't deliver at home. There are some doctors, by the way, that do support home births and will cover it. And you want to know where that situation is. Do you deliver in multiple hospitals? Do you only deliver in one hospital? There are some hospitals, not that I know of in my area, but I know in the Northeast, where they have birth centers in the hospital. They somewhat give a hybrid approach. So doing that research beforehand and knowing what is offered to you through that practice is very beneficial and will help gear what your experience having a baby will be like. So I'm going to give you just a few action steps. The first is, when we're talking about this birth plan, find out where you fall on the spectrum. The second thing would be to ask those questions that we just went through at the appointment to make sure that the practice that you're talking to falls in line with what you want. The third is to be honest about your medical and surgical history up front. I would ask your doctor, hey, given what you just learned about me or that you know about me, do you have the capability to take care of me and my baby? Would there be any limitations? One of the common things that happen now is our practice, for example, takes care of a lot of patients that are older. I'd say about less than 1% of the population are pregnant over 40. That is 10% of our practice. And there's a little stricter guidelines and recommendations as far as delivery. They're usually recommending having a baby by your due date and a little more intense monitoring towards the end of the pregnancy. That is something you would want to know going into it, because I have a lot of patients that end up trying to make decisions because, for example, they don't want to be induced, but their chance of being induced is higher if you're 43 years old and it's your first kid. And there's some risk benefit trade-off there that you may want to know about. And the last thing that I'm trying to get at here is, if their values don't align with yours, keep looking and ideally figure this out before you're pregnant, or at least in the beginning of the pregnancy, because you're kind of married to this practice for the long haul, or you're stuck trying to figure out how to transfer later on, which can get a little dicey. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, leave them below. I would love to help answer them for you. And if you want to figure out what to expect in your first pregnancy appointment, watch the video here.